Today we're going to talk about how to face the fear of camping alone. And this can actually work even if you're camping with other people, but you have a little bit of fear or anxiety about it. We're going to talk about how to kind of confront that. Stick around. Okay, so today we're going to talk about how to confront the fear of camping, whether that be camping alone or even if you're camping with other people. I know I've definitely had anxiety about it early on when I wasn't quite used to it yet. I had a few experiences where I was solo camping and not at like a campground, like there were no other people around. So you're completely alone in the world, and that can be a scary situation, and it takes a little getting used to. So I just kind of want to give you some pointers on how I kind of got comfortable with that, how maybe you can hopefully get comfortable with it. It's not always a realistic fear. That's important to remember. You have to have a sense about what is realistically dangerous about what you're doing. You know, for one thing, you have to be aware of animals. If you're traveling in North America, you have to be bear aware. You have to be aware of coyotes, any other animals that you could potentially run into that could be dangerous to you. You need to be aware of that. If you're afraid because you're in bear country and you're cooking bacon, you might be worried for a good reason, and you should take action and precautionary measures to be safe about it. But if you're just out in the woods, just camping, even if you're in bear country, but you're doing all the right things, I promise you there's less to worry about than you might realize. And I know I've spent a lot of time just swimming in anxiety over animal situations that were just made up in my head, you know, they just weren't realistic. And then there's also the risk of people, right? I think I've gotten quite a few comments from you guys about how I deal with security when I'm out camping, in terms of how I deal with people and not getting myself into trouble. And to be honest with you, I've had a lot of issues with this, and I felt very unsafe in certain places. But you have to use your best judgment, and you have to be able to determine, you know, are you realistically concerned or are you just being paranoid? If you're in a bad area and you get to what is essentially a campsite that you're going to sleep in, and, you know, there's empty beer cans everywhere and needles and trash everywhere, well, you might be in an area where people go to party. It might not be the best idea to sleep there because people could potentially show up drunk and maybe bored and looking to start some trouble, you know. You don't want to get involved in that, so use your best judgment. You know, if you're camping alone and you're concerned with people, the best course of action is to kind of fly under the radar. And that's really easy to do, especially if you're, you know, national forest camping. There's so much land that you really shouldn't run into an issue with that. But to be honest with you, I've never had an issue with people ever out in nature. Not once. I've had plenty of times where I was worried. I saw somebody that maybe freaked me out because I was alone and I didn't know, you know, what is this person doing? What do they want? Turns out they were in the same exact situation as me, probably thinking the same exact thing. What's this guy doing? What's he all about? What does he want? One time in particular, I was in Custer National Forest, I believe. I think it's in the Dakotas somewhere. I was completely alone in a campground with probably like 20 campsites, but I was totally alone. There was nobody watching the campsite. It was completely empty. I mean, I didn't have a choice. I was camping there, and this was before I was really comfortable with this whole thing of, like, you know, camping alone in the wild, not at a campground, or not where there's other people anyway. And I'm setting up camp. I made dinner. I was being careful about animals and stuff, you know, with my food. I was being bear aware. I was not leaving food out, all of that. I took all the precautions. And then, you know, I'm sitting there, and this was probably one of the first several camping experiences I had alone, and somebody showed up, and now it's just me and this other person, and I see their headlights coming, and I'm like, you know, that fear and that paranoia starts setting in, and you start having visions of, like, the most horrific things happening, and, like, this person's going to murder me and steal my bike and do all of this crap. Turns out he was just a guy camping, minding his own business. He didn't really bother me. I didn't bother him, and we waved to each other, and that was it. We went our separate ways in the morning. We actually didn't even really exchange much conversation, but it was just all this paranoia and worry for no reason, you know? So I think the big thing, what I'm getting at with that is, like, use your best judgment, whether it be animals or it be people. Take the precaution, right? You don't want to go into something ignorance isn't always bliss. You go into bear country ignorant of how to deal with that or uneducated on that, you could get yourself into trouble. So that's the first part, is just be aware of what your risks are, what the actual risks are. Now, aside from being aware of what dangers are real, let's talk about how to deal with that paranoia, because that's what this video is really about. I just wanted to make sure that I addressed, okay, there are certain dangers you should be aware of. You need to educate yourself on that and take precautions. But how do you deal with that fear, that paranoia that is not necessarily realistic? I've had quite a few experiences early on, like I said, where I was just swimming in fear and anxiety and kind of miserable and not really enjoying what I was doing because I was just nervous and I was scared and like thinking of all the worst case scenarios. And I remember a few years ago, my first big solo trip. That was when I really did a few of my first big solo camping experiences. You know, one in particular, I found this campsite on freecampsites.net, and it was an abandoned campground out in the middle of a national forest in upstate New York. I remember finding this place and I was so thrilled. There were so many trails to explore, and I just spent the day kind of riding around. I found the abandoned campground I was looking for, and you know, there were picnic tables and everything else, but it wasn't maintained. Sure enough, I mean, I was completely alone out there, and this was a good 20 miles from the last house I had seen if you went in a straight line to where I was. And I was just riding around having a good time, not really thinking about it. Then I got to camp and I set up, and the sun starts going down, and I'm starting to get worried, and I'm thinking, you know, is this a safe area? Do I need to worry about people? What about bears? All this stuff. How I faced that fear on that particular night, and this is nothing profound, but I just got busy. I did some stuff to kind of take my mind off of it. You know, I collected some firewood. I made a fire. I read a little bit. I read a little bit of my book I was reading. I didn't sit in it, and I didn't let it consume me and take over. You got to kind of catch it early on. Now, don't get me wrong. I was still nervous the whole night, and it was still not what I would consider an enjoyable experience. Not as much as it could have been, because it was really a beautiful place that I wasn't appreciating because of this fear. But I got busy, and I kind of tried to take my mind off of it. And when it was time to put the fire out, there was a little bit of anxiety about that even. But I just did. I put the fire out. I crawled in my tent. You know, I read a little more, and then I fell asleep. And I woke up in the morning, and it was a beautiful campsite, and I was totally relaxed. And, you know, I made breakfast. I hung out, organized my stuff, whatever. And I had a really great time, and it was a really beautiful place. And I know if I had stayed there one more night, that second night would have been much more relaxing because I knew the area. There was less of an unknown factor. And now it was proven that, okay, I stayed here one night and nothing happened. What are the chances that something's going to happen the second time I stay there? Probably not very good. If I do the same thing I did, I'll probably get the same result. That was that experience. Then there was this other night later on in the trip. I was just leaving Tail of the Dragon. I was heading down to Baton Rouge to see a friend of mine. I was like up in the air if I was going to be able to do that in one day. It was definitely like, that was a push. I ended up not making it. I ended up getting to Georgia, and I found a national forest with no real information on whether or not camping was acceptable there or anything, just going on my past experiences with other national forests. And I'm driving down this dirt road looking for a place to sleep, and I'm thinking, wow, this is really remote. I mean, if somebody found me out here, they could just do whatever they wanted, and I have no defense. I have no way to do anything about it. And that paranoia started sinking in before I ever even got to the campsite, which I couldn't even find actual campsites. I ended up finding an offshoot of the main dirt road that just ended up ending at like a turnaround. Didn't seem like anybody was using the road, so I just set up camp at the turnaround, kind of hoping nobody would come out there. And I was just completely defenseless and kind of really paranoid about it. More of the people aspect than the animals. For this one, there wasn't as much to keep me busy. I didn't end up making a fire that night, but I do remember laying in my tent that night just really scared, really genuinely scared. And it feels so real in the moment. but it's just one of those things, part of it too is you got to do it to get comfortable with it. And I think that was, for me, was a real turning point that night in particular. I suffered through that night, but when I woke up in the morning, this was the real turning point for me. I kind of just realized, okay, I do enjoy camping. I love this stuff. Why am I so scared all the time of these things that have never happened? I mean, I've been camping so many times all over the United States, bear country, where there's coyotes, out in the desert with rattlesnakes and scorpions, and even in bad neighborhoods, on the side of the road, just in a ditch, because I couldn't find anywhere else to sleep. I mean, I've done it all. Everything you can do in terms of camping, like laying down right next to the bike on the side of a road with my bike hidden in a bush because I couldn't find anywhere else to sleep. And you know what? I don't know how many times I've camped in my life, but like a lot, like really, really a lot. Nothing has ever happened. And that's what I realized when I woke up that morning in Georgia. And I had survived another night worrying that like this was going to be the last thing I ever saw was the roof of my tent as I closed my eyes thinking, that's it, I'm going to end up dying tonight. And I just kind of realized, you know what? I've done this enough. I have enough information to determine the chances of something like that happening are really pretty far off. I mean, it's not realistic. It's not something I really need to concern myself with. And I woke up in Georgia at the end of this dirt road in a little turnaround, and I made coffee and I read my book and I relaxed and I just really thought about this because this was something, I had every intention of continuing to solo camp and travel alone on a motorcycle and do all these things, and every intention of getting comfortable with this, whatever that took. So I sat there and I put some thought into it, and I really just came to peace with the fact that, like, it's not that likely, this is paranoia, this isn't a real fear. I'm taking all the correct precautions, I'm doing all the right stuff. There's no reason to worry about it. And that's really a big part of it too, is like, if you are scared of camping, if you have some fear and anxiety about it, the best thing you can do is find somebody else who likes to camp, who maybe isn't quite as scared of it as you, and go camp a lot. In a lot of different places. I think, maybe there's like a magic number for everybody, and who knows, maybe a 10 camping trips, maybe it's 100, but at some point you're going to get comfortable with it. At some point, you're going to be able to tell yourself, geez, I've done this quite a bit, and I haven't had any issues. Maybe I don't really need to be so concerned or so worried, and you'll start relaxing and you'll start enjoying it more. But push your comfort zone. I think that's the big thing. And even for me, even today, I still do things just to make myself a little more comfortable. I'll walk away from the camp in the middle of the night in the pitch black and just turn my flashlight off and just be in the dark in that, a little bit away from my campsite, kind of just alone in nature. And there's like an initial like, oh, this is scary. But then you start to realize like, this isn't so bad. You see the stars and it's beautiful and it's peaceful, and you find, you just find peace, and it's a nice place to be mentally when you get there and you're relaxed in nature and there's no fear, there's no anxiety, and you just feel at peace out in the wild. That's a really awesome feeling, and it's definitely worth chasing and pursuing if you like motorcycle travel, and if you have any interest in motorcycle camping. Face the fear of, even if you're camping with somebody, or if you've done that and you're comfortable with it, but you have some fear about camping alone, push your comfort zone and do it anyway, because you'll eventually get to a point where you'll be pretty comfortable with it, and you'll really be able to enjoy it and relax and just be comfortable camping anywhere in any situation. So that's kind of my journey of how I came to be comfortable camping alone anywhere. National forests, abandoned campground, side of the road in a ditch, anywhere, because when you're motorcycle traveling, you really have to be able to go with the flow, and sometimes things don't go according to plan, and you got to make adjustments and sleep on the ground next to your bike on the side of the highway. Maybe not, hopefully not, but it happens. I mean, it's happened to me where there's no hotel within reasonable price range, and you got to just do what you got to do. There's nowhere to camp, there's no campground. So anyways, that's it for me. That's all I really got to say about at least my personal journey on becoming comfortable with solo camping in the wild. Hopefully this kind of helps you guys set your mind at ease. I think the big thing here is that there's really nothing to be afraid of, and you just got to get comfortable with it. And that only comes from doing it and facing that fear and walking through that fear a few times maybe. Maybe it takes a while to get comfortable with it. But anyways, that's it for me. Like I said, I hope you got something out of this video. If you did, make sure to hit the like button. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.